Payday is one of the most financially important days of the month. Not because your salary suddenly makes you wealthy, and not because there is some secret payday formula that turns an ordinary worker into a millionaire. It matters because payday creates a temporary window in which your money is at its most flexible. Your income has arrived, your next major spending decisions have not all happened yet, and for a short period you have more control over the direction of your money than you will have later in the month. That makes payday less of a celebration and more of a financial checkpoint. The financially smart worker understands this. They do not necessarily earn more than everyone else. They do not necessarily have a huge investment portfolio. And they certainly do not make every financial decision perfectly. What they tend to do differently is reduce the number of bad decisions their future self has to make. That distinction matters. The Financial Conduct Authority's 2024 Financial Lives survey found that 1 in 10 UK adults had no cash savings, while another 1 in 5 had less than £1,000 available for emergencies. That does not mean every worker needs a massive emergency fund immediately. It means that financial resilience is partly about creating distance between your income and your next financial problem. And payday is where that distance can begin. So rather than looking at payday as the moment when you finally have permission to spend, financially smart workers treat it as the moment when they decide what their money needs to accomplish before the next payday arrives. Here are the habits that make that possible. 1. They look at the month as a system, not a single balance. One of the easiest mistakes to make after being paid is checking the bank balance and thinking, I've got plenty of money. But a bank balance is not the same thing as available spending money. It contains money with different jobs. Some of it may already be committed. Some may need to cover irregular expenses. Some might be intended for savings. And some is genuinely available for discretionary spending. The financially smart worker separates these mentally or physically through different accounts or pots. This changes the question. Instead of asking, how much money do I have, they ask, how much of this money is actually available for me to spend? That sounds like a tiny difference. It is not. Suppose someone receives £2,500 after deductions. Seeing £2,500 in the account can create a psychological feeling of abundance. But if £1,700 is already required for regular commitments and another £300 needs to cover irregular expenses and savings goals, the genuinely flexible amount is nowhere near £2,500. The money did not disappear, the illusion disappeared. This is why financially organized workers often make payday boring. They assign jobs to the money before lifestyle spending gets a chance to absorb it. The objective is not to restrict every pound, it is to know which pounds are already spoken for. 2. They move important money before they start spending. This is one of the strongest ideas in personal finance because it relies on a simple behavioral principle. Money that remains available tends to remain psychologically available. If you leave everything in one account, every pound can look like spending money. So financially smart workers often alternate transfers shortly after payday. A portion might go toward an emergency buffer, another might go toward a longer-term investment, another could be reserved for annual expenses, and the rest remains available for normal life. The percentages do not need to be identical for everyone. A worker earning £2,000 a month and supporting a family has a completely different financial reality from someone earning £5,000 with fewer commitments. The point is not the perfect percentage. The point is sequencing. Income arrives, important allocations happen, then discretionary spending takes place, not the other way round. The FCA has specifically highlighted workplace savings schemes because automatic payroll saving can help employees save regularly and improve financial resilience. That's a useful lesson beyond workplace schemes. If a good financial decision happens automatically, it doesn't have to compete with your mood, your social plans, or whatever happens to be advertised to you that week. 3. They build a buffer before trying to optimize everything. Personal finance content can make it sound as though every worker should immediately be thinking about investments, returns, market performance, and sophisticated strategies. But there's a more basic problem to solve first: financial shocks. A broken appliance, an unexpected journey, a large bill, a period of reduced income, a necessary purchase arriving at exactly the wrong time. The financially smart worker understands that savings are not only about making money, they're also about preventing disruption. A cash buffer can turn an unpleasant expense into an ordinary expense. Without savings, the same expense might require borrowing, delaying another payment, selling an investment at an inconvenient time, or putting pressure on the next month's income. The XCA's latest data shows why this matters. 1 in 10 UK adults reported having no cash savings, while another fifth had less than £1,000 available for a rainy day. That does not mean £1,000 is some universal magic number. It is simply evidence that many households have very little room between an unexpected expense and financial stress. So, Payday can be used to gradually increase that room. Even a modest automatic transfer can change the probability that a future surprise becomes a financial crisis, and that is a much more useful goal than trying to look wealthy. 4. They separate predictable, irregular expenses from emergencies. This is a subtle habit that can completely change the way a worker thinks about savings. Imagine your car insurance arrives once a year, your annual membership renews, Christmas comes every December, a professional subscription renews, your boiler eventually needs attention. None of these events are truly emergencies. They are irregular expenses. The financially smart worker does not wait for them to arrive and then declare them unexpected. They divide the expected annual cost into monthly amounts. If an expense is £600 a year, putting aside £50 a month means the eventual bill does not suddenly appear as a £600 problem. The expense was always coming, only the timing was uncertain. This creates another useful distinction. Emergency savings protect against things you could not reasonably predict. Sinking funds prepare for things you could. That distinction prevents the emergency fund from being constantly raided for ordinary annual expenses. It also makes the monthly budget more realistic, because real life is not made up entirely of monthly bills. Some costs arrive in clusters. Financially smart workers prepare for the clusters before they arrive. 5. They check the last month before planning the next one. Payday is also an opportunity to gather information, not guilt, information. Instead of opening the banking app and judging themselves for what they spent, financially organized workers look for patterns. Where did money repeatedly disappear? Which purchases were genuinely valuable? Which expenses were completely forgettable? Which category was consistently higher than expected? And which costs were one-offs? This matters because memory is a terrible budgeting system. At the end of the month, you might remember the expensive dinner, but you may not remember 20 smaller purchases that happened throughout the month, and small recurring decisions can become surprisingly large over time. The purpose of reviewing spending is not to eliminate enjoyment. It is to discover whether your actual behavior matches your priorities. If you value travel but spend heavily on things you barely remember buying, that is useful information. If you spend more on hobbies than expected but genuinely enjoy them, perhaps that spending deserves a place in the plan. Financial intelligence is not about making every category as small as possible. It is about knowing what you are buying and why. 6. They create room for discretionary spending. This may sound strange in a financial video, but financially smart workers do not necessarily try to eliminate discretionary spending. They create room for it. Why? Because a financial plan that allows no enjoyment can become difficult to maintain. The goal is not to turn Payday into a punishment. You worked for the money. You should be able to use some of it. The difference is that financially organized workers know their spending limit before they start spending. That changes the psychology. Instead of buying something and wondering whether they can afford it afterwards, they can spend within a defined amount without constantly second-guessing themselves. A £100 entertainment budget is different from randomly spending £100. The first is a decision, the second is an outcome. That distinction is surprisingly powerful, and it means financial discipline does not have to feel like deprivation. It can actually make spending more enjoyable, because the money has already been allocated for it. 7. They create friction around impulse spending. Modern workers are surrounded by systems designed to remove friction from spending. One click, saved cards, instant checkout, buy now, pay later, personalized recommendations, limited time offers, push notifications. The entire purchasing experience has become extremely efficient. Saving money, meanwhile, can require deliberate action. So, financially smart workers sometimes reverse the equation. They add friction to purchases they are likely to regret. That could mean removing saved payment details, waiting 24 hours before buying non-essential items, unsubscribing from promotional emails, turning off shopping notifications, or simply refusing to make major purchases on Payday. That last one is interesting. Payday can create an emotional sense of financial permission. You've been paid, you feel relieved, you may feel like you deserve something, and technically you might, but there's a difference between rewarding yourself and allowing your newly arrived income to trigger a spending spree. The financially smart approach is not never buy anything. It is don't let the arrival of money automatically create new spending.
8. They are suspicious of recurring commitments. One-off spending gets attention. Recurring spending often escapes it. A £12 monthly subscription does not feel significant. Neither does £9 or £18. But recurring payments are different because they do not require a fresh decision every month. They continue by default. This makes Payday an excellent time to audit them. Not just subscriptions either. Memberships, apps, premium services, banking packages, digital tools, insurance add-ons, services you forgot you were paying for. The question is not whether each payment is small. The question is whether the value you receive still justifies the recurring commitment. A financially smart worker periodically asks, "Would I sign up for this again today?" If the answer is no, the payment deserves another look. This is especially useful because recurring costs affect every future payday. Removing one unnecessary monthly commitment does not just improve this month, it changes the structure of every month that follows. 9. They treat expensive credit as a warning signal, not a normal part of Payday. There is an important difference between using credit strategically and using credit because the previous payday ran out too early. If Payday arrives and the first priority is repaying expensive borrowing accumulated to survive the previous few weeks, that is information. Something in the system may need attention. Perhaps the spending plan is unrealistic. Perhaps irregular expenses are being treated as surprises. Perhaps the cash buffer is too small. Perhaps discretionary spending is happening too early in the month. Or perhaps income simply does not currently provide enough room. The solution is not always spend less. Sometimes the numbers genuinely do not work, but pretending they do is dangerous. The FCA's 2024 Financial Lives data found that high-cost credit use had risen to 6.4% of UK adults, or around 3.5 million people. That does not mean every use of credit is financially irresponsible. It means expensive borrowing is common enough to deserve serious attention. Financially smart workers watch the direction. If Payday arrives and immediately disappears into expensive debt repayments, they do not treat that as normal. They treat it as a signal. 10. They increase savings when income increases. This is one of the quietest ways workers can improve their finances. When income rises, lifestyle often rises with it. A pay increase can disappear surprisingly quickly. A better phone, more meals out, more subscriptions, more expensive weekends, more upgrades. None of these are automatically bad. The problem is when every increase in income becomes a permanent increase in spending. Financially smart workers often capture at least part of an income increase before it becomes part of their normal lifestyle. Imagine someone receives an additional £200 a month. They might decide that £100 improves their lifestyle, while £100 increases their saving or investing. There is no universal ratio. The principle is simply to prevent every improvement in income from becoming a permanent improvement in spending. That creates a powerful long-term effect. Because future financial flexibility depends not only on how much you earn, it also depends on how much of each additional pound you manage to retain. The best payday decision might be the one you barely notice. The bigger idea behind all of this, none of these habits guarantees financial success. There are no guarantees. A person can budget perfectly and still face a major financial setback. A person can save consistently and still have periods where money becomes tight. And someone's financial position is influenced by income, family circumstances, health, employment, economic conditions, and countless other variables. So the point of payday discipline is not to create certainty, it is to improve your position under uncertainty. Think about it as probability management. Suppose two workers receive the same salary. One spends freely for the first 2 weeks, then tries to survive until the next payday. The other allocates money early, builds a buffer gradually, prepares for irregular expenses, and sets a defined amount for discretionary spending. Neither person has guaranteed financial success, but the second worker has probably reduced several sources of financial stress. So perhaps the most financially smart thing a worker can do on payday is not spend less, it is decide first. Decide what needs to be protected. Decide what needs to be saved. Decide what needs to be prepared for. Decide what can be spent without guilt, and decide which future version of yourself should receive some of today's income. Because your salary only arrives once, but the consequences of what you do with it can last much longer. Thanks for watching.